The alarm clock never had a chance to ring. At 4 in the morning, Keisha Williams was already up, her bare feet touching the cold floor of the small apartment on the south side of Detroit. 15 years of waking before dawn had turned her body into a precision machine. She no longer needed alarms to know when it was time to begin another day. The kitchen was the heart of the two-bedroom apartment, a tight but functional space she had transformed into her personal lab. Cast iron pans inherited from her grandmother lined the shelves. Spices arranged in glass jars formed an aromatic rainbow on the counter, and a battered recipe notebook rested open by the stove like a culinary Bible. Keisha flipped on the light and took a deep breath, letting the early morning silence wrap around her like a hug. It was during this hour, before the world woke and brought its urgent demands, that she allowed herself to dream. And this morning was special. Today, she would finalize the last details of the business plan that had consumed her thoughts for the past 3 years. Her hands moved with ancestral familiarity as she prepped the ingredients. Chicken cut into even pieces, flour seasoned with just the right ratio of salt, paprika, and freshly ground black pepper. The recipe wasn't written anywhere. It lived in her hands, passed down from generation to generation like a precious heirloom. "Baby!" She could hear Grandma Essie's voice echoing in her memory. "Cooking ain't just mixing ingredients. It's putting your soul on a plate. It's turning pain into seasoning, tears into salt, love into flavor nobody ever forgets." Grandma Essie had raised Keisha after her mother died in a car crash when she was just 8 years old. Her father, a man who never learned to handle responsibility, disappeared shortly after the funeral, leaving a young girl orphaned in the care of a 60-year-old woman who made a living cleaning houses in the city's wealthy neighborhoods. Essie's house in McDougal Hunt was small and old, with plumbing that always acted up and heating that worked when it felt like it. But the kitchen was magic. It was where Essie turned simple, cheap ingredients into meals that warmed more than just the belly. They warmed the soul. Where she taught Keisha that cooking was an act of love, of resistance, of preserving a culture the world kept trying to erase. "You got the gift, baby," Essie used to say, watching Keisha work cookie dough with still small hands. "Your hands know what to do before your head catches up." Now, at 33, Keisha finally understood what her grandmother meant. Her hands worked independently while her mind traveled through time, remembering Sunday mornings helping Essie in the kitchen, learning that every dish told a story, carried a memory, preserved a piece of who they were. The oil was at the perfect temperature. She knew by the sound when the first piece of chicken hit the surface. A loud, steady sizzle, bubbles forming a golden frame around the meat. Essie had passed away 5 years ago, taken by a cancer that was discovered too late, but her lessons lived on in every dish Keisha prepared. While the chicken fried, she turned her attention to the dining table, where stacks of neatly arranged papers awaited her final review. 3 years of meticulous work, financial projections, market analysis, floor plans, detailed menu, marketing strategies, all for a dream she'd named Soul Kitchen, a restaurant that would honor African-American culinary traditions while elevating them to a new level. The idea was born during a particularly grueling shift at Detroit Medical Center. It was her second consecutive shift. She picked up extra hours whenever possible to accelerate her savings, when a coworker commented on missing her grandmother's cooking. "My grandma made the best mac and cheese in the world," sighed Jennifer, an older nurse from Mississippi. "Nowadays, all I find is frozen crap or fancy versions with no soul." It was like a light bulb went off in Keisha's head. Detroit was full of people like Jennifer, people with Southern roots, children and grandchildren of the Great Migration that brought millions of African Americans to northern industrial cities in search of opportunity. People who carried powerful taste memories but could only find fast food or watered-down versions of dishes that were part of their identity. That same night, she started writing. At first, it was just scattered notes, dishes she knew how to make, her grandmother's recipes she could adapt, ideas for how to present soul food in a refined way without losing its essence. Then came the financial calculations, location research, competitive analysis. The chicken was golden and crispy. Keisha removed it from the oil and placed it on paper towels, seasoning it with sea salt while it was still hot. The aroma filled the apartment, a mix of spices and nostalgia that always transported her back to her grandmother's kitchen. She plated a serving and brought it to the table next to her papers. That was how she worked best, with real food beside her, a constant reminder of why she was doing all this. She opened her laptop and began reviewing the document one last time. Soul Kitchen, a contemporary comfort food concept. The title glowed on the screen, followed by 60 pages of research, analysis, and passion, turned into business language. Over the past few years, she'd learned to speak the language of bankers, studying terms like cash flow, break-even point, and SWOT analysis, with the same dedication she once used to master seasoning balance. The concept was simple yet revolutionary, a restaurant that celebrated authentic soul food but presented it with sophistication. Mac and cheese made with artisanal cheeses, fried chicken using refined French techniques, greens simmered in homemade broth with modern touches, an elegant yet welcoming atmosphere, professional yet warm service, fair prices that reflected quality. The financial projections filled 12 dense pages. Initial investment of $45,000, $15,000 from her savings, and $30,000 in a bank loan. 24 seats, open Tuesday through Sunday, with projected revenue growing over the first 3 years. She had studied every number obsessively, redoing the math dozens of times to ensure it was both realistic and ambitious. The location was already chosen, a spot in Corktown, a historic neighborhood undergoing revitalization. The rent was high, but the foot traffic of young professionals and culture-seeking tourists made the investment worth it. She'd even spoken informally with the landlord, who showed interest in hosting a concept restaurant in the space. Keisha bit into the chicken and closed her eyes, savoring the contrast between the crispy crust and the juicy meat. This would be Soul Kitchen's signature dish. Fried chicken just like Essie taught her, served with gourmet sides and on elegant tableware. She returned to her laptop and opened the staffing section. She already knew exactly who she wanted to hire. Marcus, a young chef trained at the Culinary Institute who worked at a fancy restaurant but dreamed of exploring his culinary roots. Diana, a seasoned waitress she knew by sight, known for being efficient and charismatic, and maybe 2 more kitchen staff once business picked up. The menu took up 6 pages, each dish accompanied by a detailed description and estimated cost. Writing it had been the most joyful part, turning memories into words, translating flavors into business language without losing the poetry. Grandma Essie's fried chicken, juicy pieces marinated for 24 hours and fried to perfection, served with sweet potato mash topped with handmade marshmallows, and sautéed collard greens with smoked bacon. Soul Kitchen mac and cheese, handmade pasta baked with a blend of aged cheddar, Gruyere, and Parmesan, finished with seasoned breadcrumbs and fresh scallions. BBQ ribs with bourbon glaze, slow-cooked for 8 hours and bathed in house-made Kentucky bourbon barbecue sauce, served with black-eyed peas and cornmeal cornbread. Each dish was a bridge between past and present, tradition and innovation. It was her way of honoring Essie while creating something new, something of her own. 5 a.m. came too fast. In 2 hours, she would have to leave for another 12-hour hospital shift. But there were still a few final details to review. The market analysis showed growth in the comfort food segment. The marketing plan emphasized authenticity and quality. The expansion strategies were conservative but promising. Keisha printed the complete document, placed copies into 3 separate folders, and slipped them all into a black executive binder she had bought just for the occasion. Tomorrow, she would finally meet with Mr. Patterson from First National Bank to formally present her loan application. 3 years of sleepless nights, sacrificed weekends, small pleasures denied to save every possible cent. 3 years of testing and perfecting recipes, studying the market, building a dream brick by brick. 3 years preparing for this moment. She put away the laptop and washed the dish, leaving the kitchen spotless for when she returned from the hospital. The apartment was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now, one filled with expectation, possibility, a future finally within reach. She looked out the kitchen window and saw the first lights flicker on in neighboring apartments. Detroit was slowly waking up, a resilient city that knew how to reinvent itself after every fall. Just like her family, like her whole community. She headed back to her bedroom to get ready for another day of work, but her thoughts were already on tomorrow. She had carefully chosen what to wear. A navy blue blazer bought on clearance but looked more expensive than it was. A conservative white blouse, black heels with a low but elegant lift. The first impression would be crucial. In the bathroom mirror, she rehearsed her pitch for the 100th time. Good morning, Mr. Patterson. Thank you so much for meeting with me. I'm here to present Soul Kitchen, an innovative comfort food concept that combines family tradition with culinary excellence. The words flowed naturally now, polished by hours of practice. She knew every number by heart, every projection, every detail of the plan. She was ready. Tomorrow was the day. After 3 years of planning, it was time to turn the dream into reality. The First National Bank stood imposingly on the corner of Woodward Avenue, its white marble pillars reflecting the morning light like perfectly aligned teeth in a fake smile. Keisha stopped on the sidewalk across the street, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder and taking a deep breath. 3 years of sacrifices, sleepless nights, and postponed dreams were condensed in the black folder she carried. 9 o'clock sharp. She had arrived 15 minutes early but had spent the time watching the flow of people. Executives in dark suits rushing in, elegant women with heels echoing across the marble floor, discreet yet alert security guards. A world that wasn't hers, but one she needed to enter in order to claim what was rightfully hers. The glass revolving doors would swallow her up along with the air conditioning that contrasted sharply with the September heat outside. Inside, the bank was a symphony of neutral tones: beige, gray, muted gold. Everything meticulously designed to convey seriousness and prosperity. The smell was of fine leather and expensive cleaning products, with a subtle hint of French perfume from the most elegant clients. Keisha approached the reception desk, where a young blonde woman with impeccably straight hair was typing something into a computer. She wore a navy blazer that probably cost more than Keisha's monthly nurse's salary. "Good morning," Keisha said, keeping her voice steady. "I have a 9 o'clock appointment with Mr. Patterson. I'm Keisha Williams." The receptionist looked up, quickly assessing Keisha's appearance before checking the screen. "Ah, yes, found it. One moment, please." She picked up the internal phone. "Mr. Patterson, your 9 o'clock is here." Keisha couldn't hear the response, but she saw a subtle shift in the receptionist's expression. A barely perceptible furrow of the brow. A quick reevaluation in her gaze. "He'll be right down. You can have a seat over there," she said, pointing to a waiting area with brown leather armchairs. The chairs were more comfortable than they looked, but Keisha couldn't relax. She kept her back straight, feet firmly planted on the floor, the folder resting in her lap. Other clients passed by. Some greeted staff by name. Others were immediately escorted to offices on the upper floors. She observed everything, trying to decode the unspoken rules of that environment. 10 minutes past 9, a middle-aged man emerged from the elevator. Tall, lean, with slicked-back gray hair and a gray suit that cost more than Keisha's car. His eyes scanned the lobby until they found her, and she saw the exact moment he identified her. There was a barely perceptible pause. A shift in his expression from professional neutrality to something colder. "Ms. Williams?" He approached with measured steps, extending a cold, slightly damp hand. "Richard Patterson, let's go to my office." Keisha shook his hand firmly, looking him straight in the eye. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Patterson." His office was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a hallway with thick carpet that muffled footsteps. Patterson led her into a room with dark mahogany walls, framed diplomas, and a massive desk that seemed designed to intimidate whoever sat across from it. "Please, have a seat," he said, settling into his leather executive chair. "So, I understand you're interested in a loan for... let's see." He glanced through some papers on his desk. "A restaurant?" "Yes." Keisha opened her folder with confident movement. "I've brought a complete business plan I'd like to present." Patterson leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced over his chest. Of course. But first, tell me a little about your experience in the food industry." "I've worked as a nurse for 15 years, but I've been cooking since I was a child. I learned from my grandmother, who had a special talent for..." "Nurse," he interrupted, making a note. "And what kind of restaurant are you thinking of? Fast food?" Keisha felt the first prick of irritation, but kept her voice calm. "No, Mr. Patterson. It's a gourmet comfort food concept, focused on traditional African-American dishes elevated to a high..." "Ah, I see. Ethnic food." There was something condescending in his tone. "And who would your target audience be? The neighborhood you live in?" The question sounded like a veiled judgment. Keisha took a deep breath. "The target audience is diverse, Mr. Patterson. Detroit has a varied demographic that appreciates good food, regardless of origin. If you'll allow me to present my business plan..." "Sure, let's take a look." Patterson reached out with a gesture that felt more procedural than interested. Keisha handed him the document, watching as he flipped through the pages too quickly to actually read them. His eyes paused on the numbers, but she could tell he wasn't absorbing the content. $45,000, he murmured. "That's quite a sum for someone with your financial situation." "My financial situation is detailed on pages 12 through 15, Keisha said firmly. "I have $15,000 in savings, proof of stable income, and a repayment plan." "Yes, I see you're diligent with your savings," Patterson continued flipping. "But wouldn't franchising be a safer option? McDonald's, Subway, established brands?" Keisha felt her blood boil. "Mr. Patterson, the concept of Soul Kitchen is to offer something unique and authentic. It's not just about food, it's about cultural experience, about preserving traditions." "Traditions," he repeated, placing the plan on the desk. "Ms. Williams, I'll be frank. This is a high-risk business. Restaurants have a very high failure rate, especially niche establishments. As I said, there is proven demand for authentic comfort food in Detroit. I've done extensive market research." "Market research?" Patterson raised an eyebrow. "With what resources? Professional firms cost thousands of dollars." "I conducted primary research, interviewed potential customers, analyzed the competition, studied industry trends. Keisha could hear her own voice tightening. Patterson sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. Ms. Williams, I admire your enthusiasm, but bank loans are based on rigorous risk analysis. Your credit history is satisfactory for a nurse, but for an entrepreneur, well, we have no precedent. Precedent for what exactly? There was a pause. Patterson adjusted his tie. Someone with your profile succeeding in this specific sector. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Keisha felt each one crystallize in her mind. Someone with your profile. A black woman, a nurse, a resident of Detroit's South Side. Someone who didn't fit his mold of a successful entrepreneur. Mr. Patterson, she said, measuring each word. My profile includes 15 years of professional experience, proven financial discipline, deep knowledge of the product I intend to offer, and a detailed business plan. What other precedent do you need? Patterson leaned forward, assuming a posture that aimed to be paternal. Look, I understand you have a passion for cooking. Why not start small? A food truck, perhaps? Or neighborhood catering? Something more suited to your budget. Suited to your budget, your neighborhood, your profile. Each word was a brick in the wall between her and her dreams. Mr. Patterson, the Soul Kitchen concept is based on 3 years of rigorous planning. This is not a hobby or a whim. It's a serious business with real growth and profit potential. Soul Kitchen, he repeated the name in a tone that made it sound smaller, more exotic. It's an interesting name. Keisha realized she was losing the battle. Every word out of Patterson's mouth was a small humiliation disguised as professional pragmatism. He had decided to reject her before she even opened her mouth, but was prolonging the agony for some sadistic sense of protocol. Mr. Patterson, may I know specifically which criteria my plan fails to meet? What adjustments would be necessary for approval? Patterson resumed flipping through the document, making small disapproving noises. Well, for starters, the business model is very optimistic. These sales projections seem inflated for the market you've identified. Based on what analysis, Mr. Patterson? Are you familiar with the comfort food market in Detroit? The question caught him off guard. For a moment, his mask of professional superiority slipped, revealing genuine irritation. Ms. Williams, I've been a loan manager for 12 years. I've seen hundreds of plans like yours. The reality is, most fail because entrepreneurs overestimate demand and underestimate challenges. Most like mine? Another loaded pause. Ambitious plans from people with limited industry experience. Keisha clenched her fists under the table. He was being careful with his words, but the meaning was crystal clear. Patterson stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Ms. Williams, I'll be honest with you. At this time, the bank cannot approve your loan request. I suggest you reconsider the scope of the project. Perhaps start with something smaller. Build a track record in the industry, and then we can talk again. Keisha stayed seated for a moment, processing the rejection. Then she slowly stood, gathering her papers with dignity. Thank you for your time, Mr. Patterson. She extended her hand, which he shook briefly. Best of luck with your future endeavors. Keisha walked to the door but turned before leaving. Mr. Patterson, one last question. If I were a 40-year-old white man with an MBA presenting the exact same plan, what would your response be? Patterson turned red. Ms. Williams, that's a very serious accusation. Our decisions are based purely on technical criteria. Of course they are, Keisha said, opening the door. Have a nice day. The hallway had never felt so long. Each step echoed like a hammer pounding the coffin of her dreams. In the elevator, she held herself together, even as others joined on the intermediate floors. Only in the lobby, passing the same leather chairs and the same cold marble, did she allow the humiliation to fully set in. The blonde receptionist didn't even look up as she passed. The revolving doors spat her back out onto the sidewalk of Woodward Avenue, where the September sun seemed to mock her defeat. The city's rhythm continued unbothered, cars passing, people hurrying along, life going on while hers crumbled. Keisha walked aimlessly for a few minutes, letting the pain and anger mix in her chest. 3 years. 3 years waking up at 4 a.m., working double shifts, denying herself small pleasures to save every penny. 3 years perfecting recipes, studying the market, dreaming of the day she would finally... But as she walked down the street, Patterson's words echoed in her mind, and something else began to grow inside her. It wasn't defeat. It was fire. A fire that began to burn not just with rage, but with a fierce determination she hadn't known she possessed. Because if she'd learned anything from that humiliating morning, it was that people like Richard Patterson underestimated people like her. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly the motivation she needed to prove they were completely wrong. The decision came 3 days after the humiliation at First National Bank, while Keisha stood in her apartment kitchen at 5 in the morning, preparing coffee before another 12-hour shift at the hospital. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from a new and dangerous energy that had settled in her chest since the meeting with Patterson. She looked out the kitchen window at the garage where her 2018 Honda Civic was parked. It wasn't much, but it was reliable, paid off, and represented 3 years of sacrifice to get decent transportation. Now, however, it had become something different. Seed capital. If they won't bet on me, she murmured to herself, stirring her coffee, then I'll bet on myself. The first call was to Marcus Thompson, owner of Thompson Motors, a small used car dealership in the neighborhood where she'd grown up. Marcus had known her since she was a child. He had been friends with her father, and had always treated the Williams family with respect. "Keisha, girl, you sure about this?" Marcus asked 2 hours later, inspecting the Honda in the dealership lot. "It's a good car. You'll need transportation." "I'll need a lot more than transportation, Mr. Marcus." She signed the papers with steady hands. $18,000. Is that a fair price? "That's fair," he said, shaking his head with fatherly concern. "But let me give you some unsolicited advice. Restaurant business is tougher than it looks. I've seen a lot of good people go under in this field." Keisha folded the check carefully before putting it in her wallet. "Everybody's been giving me that advice, Mr. Marcus. Maybe it's time someone tried anyway." The second conversation was with Diane Foster, her neighbor from the apartment next door. Diane worked as a supervisor at General Motors and had a reputation in the building for being frugal and sensible with money. $5,000 loaned, Keisha said, sitting at Diane's kitchen table that afternoon. 8% interest per year, paid back in 2 years. I've got it all documented. Diane studied the homemade contract Keisha had prepared. At 52, she was a practical woman who didn't make financial decisions on impulse. "Keisha, honey, you know I respect you. I saw how you cared for your mom when she was sick, how hard you work. But this," she pointed to the papers, "this is a big leap. Diane, I'm not asking for charity. I'm offering an investment with guaranteed returns. And if it goes wrong, you still have my word. Your word means a lot to me. You know that." Diane sighed, picking up a pen. "But that's not why I'm lending. It's because I saw you make those chicken and waffles for the building barbecue last year, and I still dream about that sauce." The third loan came from an unexpected source. Reverend James Washington of Mount Olive Baptist Church, where Keisha occasionally attended Sunday services. She hadn't expected much when she scheduled a meeting with him, but the Reverend, a 70-year-old man with calloused hands from a youth in construction, listened to her proposal with genuine attention. $3,000, he finally said, looking out the window of his modest office at the back of the church. "Our congregation has a small fund to help community members with worthy ventures. These aren't loans. They're investments in hope. Reverend, I insist on paying back with interest." "Child," he interrupted with a gentle smile, "when you're successful, and I said when, not if, you can pay back whatever you think is fair to help the next person with a dream." With $26,000 in hand, money from the car, loans, and her own savings, Keisha began searching for a space. The reality of Detroit's commercial real estate market was a shock. Decent places cost much more than she had calculated, and spaces within her budget were mostly depressing. Walking through Corktown, a neighborhood caught between urban decay and gentrification, she found a space on Russell Street. It was an old diner that had closed 2 years earlier, just 400 square meters, dusty windows, and a persistent smell of rancid grease. But it had one thing the other places didn't: potential. "The rent is $2,200 a month," said Janet Rodriguez, the realtor, carefully stepping over debris on the floor. "The owner requires 3 months deposit plus the first month in advance, and you'll need to invest heavily in renovations." Keisha walked through the empty space, visualizing tables where there was rubble, imagining the scent of her spices replacing the odor of abandonment. The kitchen was small but functional, with plumbing that seemed solid and enough space for basic equipment. "I'll take it," she said. The renovation began with her own hands. Keisha took a week off from the hospital, using her accumulated vacation days, and worked 16-hour days cleaning, painting, fixing. Her muscles, used to long hospital corridor walks, protested the intense physical labor. Carlos Mendoza, who had a small remodeling business and had done some work in her apartment building, agreed to help with the more technical repairs in exchange for free meals during the first 6 months of operation. "You sure about this, mija?" Carlos asked while fixing the electrical system. "Restaurant business is tough. My brother tried once, lost everything." "Everyone's got a brother, cousin, or neighbor who tried and failed," Keisha replied, scraping old paint off the wall. "Nobody tells me about the ones who made it." The equipment was the biggest challenge. New industrial stoves cost more than her entire budget, so Keisha spent weeks scouring auctions of closed restaurants, online classifieds, and specialized junkyards. She found a 6-burner stove that needed some repairs for $800, an industrial fridge with a minor defect for $500, and a fryer that worked perfectly but looked terrible for $300. Doesn't need to be pretty, she told herself while cleaning the grease caked on the fryer. It needs to work. The nights were the hardest. After full days renovating the restaurant, Keisha came home exhausted, only to find her brain wouldn't shut off. She stayed awake, calculating costs, running recipes through her mind, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. One of those nights, sitting on the floor of her future restaurant at 2 a.m., surrounded by paint cans and borrowed tools, she called her sister Lisa, who lived in Atlanta. "Lisa, I think I'm going crazy," she said, her voice echoing in the empty space. "Honey, you were already crazy when you decided to leave your stable job to open a restaurant," Lisa replied, but there was affection in her voice. "The question is it the right kind of crazy?" Keisha looked around the space. The walls were clean now, painted a soft yellow that brought warmth to the room. The kitchen was starting to look functional. There was a lot of work ahead, but for the first time in weeks, the space was beginning to look like what she had envisioned. "I think it is," she finally said. "Then stop calling me crying at 2 a.m, Lisa laughed. "Go to sleep, you'll need your energy." The first week of September brought the final details. Tables and chairs bought from an Italian restaurant that was relocating, plates and kitchen utensils from a restaurant supply outlet, and finally, the long-awaited city operating license. Keisha was alone in the restaurant when the city inspector made his final visit. He was a middle-aged black man, thin, wearing glasses and carrying a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Everything looks to be in order," he said after checking the kitchen, bathrooms, and ventilation system. "You did a good job here. The place was a mess when Maria closed." "Thank you," Keisha said, trying not to show how relieved she felt. "But let me give you some advice." He continued signing the papers. "Good food isn't enough. Location isn't enough. You need to connect with the community, make people feel at home. That's what separates those who succeed from those who close within 6 months." That night, Keisha installed the sign she had ordered herself, "Soul Kitchen," in gold letters on a dark green background. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. When she tested the lighting for the first time, the letters shone against the darkness of Russell Street like a promise. She stood on the sidewalk, looking at what she had built with her own hands and $26,000. The now clean windows reflected the golden light of the sign. Inside, she could see the carefully arranged tables, the organized and ready kitchen, the counter where she planned to serve her creations. When she finally turned on the lights of Soul Kitchen for the first time, Keisha didn't know if she was closer to success or complete bankruptcy. The first official day of Soul Kitchen was a silent disaster. Keisha arrived at 5 a.m, turned on all the equipment, prepared her special marinades, and set everything up to welcome a crowd that never showed. During the first 8 hours, only 3 people came in: a homeless man asking for water, an elderly lady who bought just a cup of coffee, and a teenager who looked at the menu, made a face at the prices, and left without ordering anything. By 6 p.m, Keisha was sitting at one of the empty tables, eating a plate of fried chicken she had made for customers who hadn't come. The silence was deafening, just the hum of the refrigerator and occasional traffic on Russell Street. "Maybe this was a mistake," she murmured to herself, cutting the ironically perfect chicken. The second day brought 4 customers, the third 6. By the end of the first week, she had served a total of 28 people and made $240, not even enough to cover the electricity bill. But Keisha didn't give up. Every morning, she arrived before dawn, prepared fresh food, cleaned every surface until it shone, and waited. She began to recognize the regular passers-by, construction workers passing through in the morning, office workers cutting through during lunch, neighborhood residents coming home from work. It was in the second week that she met her first loyal customer, Dorothy Martinez, a 60-year-old Hispanic woman who worked as a janitor in a nearby commercial building. She came in on a rainy October morning, ordered coffee and a slice of sweet potato pie, and couldn't hide her surprised expression when she tasted it. "Mija," she said, closing her eyes while chewing. "Who taught you to make this?" "My grandmother," Keisha replied, pouring more coffee. "Her recipe, but with some of my own tweaks." Dorothy became a daily customer, always arriving at 7:15 in the morning, always ordering the same thing. More importantly, she began talking about Soul Kitchen to anyone who would listen. "There's a girl down on Russell who makes sweet potato pie that's sinful," she'd tell her coworkers. "And her chicken? Jesus, it's better than my grandma's, and I never thought I'd say that about anyone." Word of mouth in neighborhoods like Corktown works like an intricate web. A recommendation from Dorothy brought 3 new customers: Each of those brought 2 more. By the end of the 3rd week, Keisha was serving about 30 people a day. Still far from profitable, but enough to create a livelier atmosphere in the small restaurant. The turning point came from a completely unexpected source: Jasmine Rodriguez, a 22-year-old freelance graphic designer who ran a local food blog with a few thousand followers on Instagram. Jasmine came in one Friday afternoon in November, clearly looking for a cheap place to grab lunch between meetings. She ordered the special of the day: smoked pork ribs with Keisha's homemade barbecue sauce, served with mashed sweet potatoes and sautéed kale. Keisha watched discreetly as Jasmine took photos of the food before eating. She was used to that. Many customers photographed their meals. But something about the attention Jasmine paid to the details was different. "Excuse me," Jasmine called after finishing the plate. "Are you the chef?" "I'm the owner, chef, waitress, and cleaner," Keisha laughed, approaching the table. "Any problem with the food?" "Problem? This was the best meal I've had in Detroit in 2 years." "How do you get that flavor in the sauce?" Keisha smiled. "Family secret. But I can tell you it involves 3 kinds of peppers and 24 hours of patience." Jasmine posted about Soul Kitchen that very night. The Instagram post had a photo of the ribs that looked like it was taken by a professional photographer, accompanied by a 3-paragraph enthusiastic caption about Corktown's hidden gem serving authentic soul food made with love. The post got 400 likes in the first 2 hours. The next day, 500 comments. By the end of the week, it had been shared by several other local food influencers. The following Monday, Keisha arrived at the restaurant at 5 in the morning as usual, but when she opened the doors at 11, there was a line of 15 people on the sidewalk. "Did you come because of Instagram?" she asked the first couple in line. "I came because of that post about the ribs," the man said. "My wife hasn't stopped talking about it all weekend." That day, Keisha served 87 customers. 2 days later, it was over 100. The numbers kept growing, but so did the physical and mental pressure. Keisha was working 18 hours a day. She arrived before dawn to prep, cooked alone during peak hours, cleaned after closing, and then stayed late placing ingredient orders and planning the next day's menu. Her hands were permanently stained with spices and small burns from pans. Her back constantly ached, and she had lost 10 pounds in 5 weeks. "You need to hire help," Carlos Mendoza said one afternoon, watching Keisha rush between the stove and tables during lunch. "With what money?" she replied, sweating while flipping 6 burgers at once. "I'm barely covering costs. Hiring someone will break the budget." But Carlos was right. Quality began to suffer as Keisha couldn't give individual attention to each dish anymore. Customers waited longer, orders sometimes came out wrong, and Keisha was reaching her physical limit. The solution came in the form of Maria Santos, a 50-year-old experienced cook who had worked in several city restaurants before being laid off when the last one closed during the pandemic. Maria showed up on a busy December afternoon when Keisha was clearly overwhelmed. "You need help in the kitchen," Maria said directly, surveying the controlled chaos. "I can work for $7 an hour until you can pay more." It was below minimum wage, but Keisha was desperate. "Maria, I can't ask you to work for that little..." "Mija, I need to work, you need help, we can help each other. When the place grows, you pay me more. Deal?" Maria changed the kitchen dynamics. Experienced and efficient, she took over prep tasks and allowed Keisha to focus on more complex dishes and customer service. Quality stabilized, wait times dropped, and for the first time in months, Keisha got more than 4 hours of sleep a night. The next milestone came in January when Detroit Food and Wine magazine sent a critic for a review. Keisha didn't know he was there, a well-dressed, middle-aged black man who ordered several menu items and ate alone at a corner table, discreetly taking notes. The review came out 3 weeks later, 4 out of 5 stars, titled "Soul Kitchen, Authenticity and Passion in Every Dish." The critic specifically praised the masterful seasoning that honors Southern traditions while adding unique contemporary touches, and the warm atmosphere that makes you feel like you're eating at your grandmother's house. The morning the magazine hit the stands, the line outside Soul Kitchen stretched around the corner. "Keisha, did you see this?" Dorothy shouted, waving the magazine as she came in for her morning coffee. "You're famous." Fame brought opportunities and challenges in equal measure. Catering orders started coming in, first small ones, then larger corporate events. A local company asked Keisha to provide lunch for 200 people. A wealthy family from Birmingham ordered a full dinner for a party of 50 guests. "I can do this," Keisha told Maria while calculating whether they could handle the catering order. "But we're going to need one more person." They hired Tommy Washington, a 19-year-old from the neighborhood who was looking for work. Tommy had no kitchen experience but had energy, was eager to learn, and grew up eating the kind of food Keisha made. With a 3-person team, Soul Kitchen managed not only to meet growing demand, but also to expand the menu. Keisha added breakfast options: buttermilk waffles with fried chicken, grits bowls with spiced sausage, sweet potato hash browns. Each addition was carefully tested, adjusted, and retested until perfect. Weekends became events. Families came from all over the Detroit metro area. Tourists included Soul Kitchen in their itineraries. Food bloggers from Chicago and other cities made special trips to try Keisha's food. But success came at a price. Keisha was making money, finally able to cover all costs and turn a profit, but working longer hours than ever. Catering orders meant 16-hour days. Weekends were a race against time to serve all customers. Her hands, already marked from months of intense work, developed tendinitis that made her wake up in pain. Her back protested every time she bent over the stove, and there was a deep exhaustion that even 8 hours of sleep couldn't cure. "You need to take a day off," Maria said one Monday, watching Keisha stumble slightly carrying a heavy pot. "I can't afford a day off," Keisha replied, but even she knew Maria was right. One March night, after an especially intense day serving 150 customers, Keisha was alone in the restaurant after closing, counting the day's money, $1,200, the best day since opening. She looked around the space she had transformed. The yellow walls now held photos of satisfied customers, newspaper clippings about the restaurant, and a small plaque Dorothy had given her as a gift, "Made with Love." The tables were full of stories: first dates, birthday celebrations, business lunches, family meals. 6 months later, looking at the line that wrapped around the block, Keisha could hardly believe what she had built. The meeting took place on the 42nd floor of the Renaissance Center, in a conference room with a panoramic view of the Detroit River. Keisha sat at the head of a polished mahogany table, surrounded by men in suits discussing growth metrics and horizontal expansion opportunities. 18 months after opening the first Soul Kitchen, she now owned 3 restaurants: the original in Corktown, a second in Birmingham serving wealthier suburbs, and a third in Eastern Market operating Thursday through Sunday, focused on weekend traffic. "The numbers are impressive, Keisha," said Richard Coleman, a gray-haired business consultant who had been with her since the Birmingham expansion. Combined revenue of $2.3 million in the last 12 months, profit margins of 18%, and a return on investment for each new location of just 8 months. Keisha nodded, but part of her was still surprised to hear those figures applied to what had started as a simple dream of making good food for her community. "The question now," Richard continued, "is whether we want to accept Meridian Restaurant Group's offer to develop the concept nationally." The offer had been on the table for 3 weeks. Meridian, a large restaurant holding company based in Chicago, wanted to license the Soul Kitchen brand and open 50 units in 15 states over the next 5 years. The initial amount would be $15 million plus a 6% royalty on each franchise's revenue. "It's a unique opportunity," said Jennifer Walsh, the franchising lawyer Richard had recommended. "Meridian has experience with regional brands that became national. They did this with Cajun Creek and Prairie Fire BBQ." Keisha knew both brands. She also knew that in the process of national expansion, both had lost much of what made them special. Cajun Creek, which started as a small family restaurant in New Orleans, now served reheated frozen food in over 200 locations that all looked identical from Seattle to Miami. "What would my role be in this expansion?" Keisha asked. "You'd remain the creative consultant," Jennifer replied, approving new dishes, making occasional visits to locations, participating in marketing campaigns, but day-to-day operations would be handled by Meridian's team. That was exactly what Keisha feared hearing. She looked out the window, watching the rivers flow below, and thought of Dorothy Martinez, her first loyal customer, who still came every morning to the Corktown restaurant for her coffee and sweet potato pie. "Can I think about it?" she finally said. "Of course," Richard said, "but they need an answer by the end of the month. Opportunities like this don't come around often." After the meeting, Keisha drove straight to Corktown. It was Wednesday afternoon, traditionally one of the slower times of the week, but the original Soul Kitchen was busy. Maria ran the kitchen with the efficiency of a maestro. Tommy had become sous chef and was training 2 new employees, and Sandra Williams, the first manager Keisha had hired, handled the dining room with natural competence. "How was the meeting with the men in suits?" Maria asked as Keisha entered the kitchen. "Complicated," Keisha replied, tying her apron. "They want me to sell my soul to the devil." "How much is the devil offering?" $15 million to start." Maria stopped stirring the pot of beans and looked Keisha straight in the eye. "Girl, you're kidding me?" "I'm not kidding, but I don't know if I want to accept." For the next hour, Keisha worked in the kitchen like old times, preparing her special barbecue sauce and seasoning a batch of chicken for dinner. Physical work always helped her think, and she needed to process the implications of what she'd heard. The growth of recent months had been dizzying, but also challenging. Managing 3 restaurants meant constant motion, Mornings in Corktown checking the previous night's numbers, afternoons in Birmingham handling staff issues, nights in Eastern Market ensuring quality standards were met. She had hired Marcus Johnson as executive chef to oversee consistency across the 3 locations, but still insisted on personally tasting every new dish before adding it to the menu. She had hired an accountant, an operations manager, and even a personal assistant, but continued to make all major decisions herself. "The problem isn't the money," she told Maria while adjusting the seasoning of the sauce. "The problem is that if I say yes, Soul Kitchen will just become another fast food chain. They'll standardize everything, use cheaper ingredients, train staff to follow exact recipes without understanding why." "And what's the alternative?" Maria asked. "You keep growing at your own pace?" It was a valid question. Keisha had turned down 3 other franchising offers in the last 6 months, but the pressure to expand was constant. Local investors wanted units in other Michigan cities. A group of entrepreneurs from Atlanta had offered $2 million to bring the brand to Georgia. Even a representative from an airport food court chain had reached out to her. "Maybe I can grow differently," Keisha said more to herself than to Maria. "Keep control, expand slowly, choose partners who understand the vision." 2 weeks later, Keisha sat in another meeting, this time on familiar ground. Carlos Mendoza's office, who had become her informal business mentor. Carlos had invited 2 people. Janet Morrison, a Black restaurant consultant who had helped several brands grow while maintaining their authenticity, and David Chen, a lawyer specializing in alternative business structures. "The question isn't whether you should expand," Janet said. "It's how you should expand. Traditional franchising isn't the only option." David explained concepts Keisha had never considered: joint ventures with local investors, limited licensing where she kept full editorial control, and even the possibility of creating a cooperative of independent restaurants sharing the Soul Kitchen brand. "Meridian will give you quick money," Janet said, "but it will cost you your soul. Alternatives like these take longer, earn less at first, but let you keep what made Soul Kitchen special." It was during these discussions that Keisha began forming a clear vision of what she wanted: controlled growth prioritizing quality over quantity, partnerships with people who shared her values, and expansion that strengthened local communities rather than just maximizing profits. The final decision came from an unexpected source. Keisha was at the Birmingham restaurant one Saturday afternoon when a family of 4 finished lunch and approached her. "Sorry to bother you," said the mother, a middle-aged white woman, "but we wanted to thank you. Our daughter has autism and is very selective about food, but she ate everything on her plate here. That hasn't happened in a restaurant for 2 years." The daughter, a shy girl of about 8, waved timidly to Keisha. "The chicken tasted just like Grandma's," she whispered. After the family left, Keisha thought about the interaction. This was the difference between Soul Kitchen and a corporate chain: the ability to create personal moments, to make food that touched people emotionally, to be part of the community and not just a business in it. The next day, she called Richard Coleman. "I'm going to decline Meridian's offer," she said. "Keisha, are you sure? $15 million? I'm sure, but I want you to help me explore other options. I want to grow, but on my terms." The following months were a roller coaster of strategic planning. Keisha developed strict criteria for expansion: new restaurants only in cities she could visit personally at least once a month, local partners who understood and respected Soul Kitchen's culture, and a training system emphasizing the why behind each recipe, not just the how. She also set limits for herself: no more than 1 new location per year. Each restaurant would have at least 18 months to establish itself before considering the next, and she would maintain majority ownership in any new venture. The first test of this new philosophy came when a group of investors from Columbus, Ohio, approached her. Instead of a traditional franchise, they proposed a joint venture where Keisha would keep 60% control, and they would provide capital and local market knowledge. "That's exactly the kind of partnership we're looking for," Janet Morrison said after reviewing the proposal. "They understand they're not just buying a restaurant concept, they're buying a philosophy." When the lawyer mentioned that the First National Bank was for sale due to financial troubles, Keisha felt something familiar warming her chest. The First National Bank of Detroit had been a solid institution for 127 years. Founded in 1898, it survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and the 2008 automotive crisis. But it couldn't withstand a series of bad investment decisions in real estate derivatives and loans to tech companies that never materialized. Keisha spent 3 weeks immersed in financial documents, audit reports, and risk analyses. She hired 2 independent banking consultants and a lawyer specializing in mergers and acquisitions. What she discovered was both surprising and revealing. "The bank isn't technically insolvent," explained Michael Roberts, one of the consultants during a meeting in her office. "They have solid assets, mainly the historic downtown Detroit building and a portfolio of stable commercial loans. The problem is the toxic liabilities, which make up about 40% of the portfolio. How much would be needed to acquire and restructure? Keisha asked. Considering they need to sell quickly to avoid federal intervention, I'd say between $8 and $12 million, maybe less if you negotiate well. Keisha had the money. Profits from the 3 restaurants combined with some smart investments and selling 20% ownership in Soul Kitchen to a local investor group had created a net worth of $15 million. But why do you want to buy a bank? Janet Morrison asked when Keisha shared her plans. That's a completely different business from what you know. Keisha looked out the window of her new office, a modest space above the Corktown restaurant she had rented to manage her expanding business. It's not about banking knowledge, she said. It's about power. It's about making sure people like me don't have to go through what I went through. The due diligence investigation revealed details that made the acquisition even more attractive. First National had lost 23% of its commercial clients in the past 2 years, mostly small business owners who had moved to smaller community banks or fintechs. The institution's reputation was declining, especially among local entrepreneurs. They created a hostile environment for exactly the kind of customer a community bank should serve, said David Chen, the lawyer now coordinating Keisha's legal team. It's as if they forgot their success depended on the local community. Negotiations were intense. First National's board initially tried to dismiss Keisha as a novice with no banking experience. But when she presented a formal $9.2 million offer, accompanied by a detailed restructuring analysis and a 5-year business plan, attitudes changed quickly. They underestimated you, Michael Roberts said after the 3rd round of talks. They thought you were just a local business owner trying to play big. Now they realize you did your homework better than they did. The final offer included purchasing all the bank's assets for $8.7 million, assuming customer deposits, insured by the FDIC, and an agreement to retain 80% of existing employees for at least 6 months during the transition. There's one condition, Keisha said during the final meeting with the sellers. I want the right to review and modify all senior management positions immediately after acquisition. The board chairman, an elderly man named Harold Brennan, frowned. That's unusual? It's non-negotiable, Keisha replied calmly. 2 weeks later, on a cold March morning, Keisha parked her black BMW in front of First National Bank. It was 7:30 a.m., 30 minutes before public opening. She wore a navy blue Giorgio Armani suit she had bought specifically for the occasion, carrying an Italian leather portfolio with the final acquisition documents. Janet Morrison accompanied her, along with David Chen and a representative from the federal banking regulator who needed to witness the formal ownership transfer. Are you ready? Janet asked as they stopped in front of the main entrance. Keisha took a deep breath. I've been ready for 2 years. The First National lobby was impressive. High ceilings, marble columns, dark wood furniture evoking an era of stability and tradition. But it also felt cold, intimidating, exactly as Keisha remembered from her first and only visit. Margaret Wilson, Patterson's assistant, was behind the main counter when they entered. She recognized Keisha immediately, the same look of politely disguised superiority. Good morning, Margaret said. Mr. Patterson hasn't arrived yet. Do you have a scheduled meeting? Not exactly, Keisha replied, handing her the folder. I'm the new owner of this bank. Margaret's expression quickly shifted from condescension to confusion to something close to panic. She flipped through the documents with trembling hands. I need to call Mr. Patterson. Please do, Keisha said, sitting in one of the leather chairs in the lobby. We'll wait. Patterson arrived 15 minutes later, still buttoning his jacket as he walked briskly through the lobby. Keisha watched him approach. The same man who, 2 years earlier, had dismissed her as a black woman without adequate collateral. Now he looked smaller, older, definitely less confident. There must be some mistake, Patterson said without greeting. First National isn't for sale to whom? Keisha interrupted, standing. To a woman? To a black person? To someone you deemed unworthy of credit? Patterson went pale. David Chen stepped forward and handed him a second copy of the documents. There is no mistake, Mr. Patterson, David said. The acquisition was finalized yesterday. My client is now the majority owner of this institution. Over the next few minutes, Keisha watched Patterson struggle to process the reality. He read the documents twice, made 3 calls to lawyers, and finally sat down heavily in a chair. What do you want? He asked at last. First, Keisha said, I want you to acknowledge that you misjudged my financial capacity and my potential as a businesswoman. Patterson nodded reluctantly. Second, I want you to understand this change isn't about personal revenge, but about ensuring this bank properly serves its community. Keisha paused, feeling the weight of the moment. And third, she continued, I want to inform you that your services will no longer be needed. Patterson looked at her with a mix of anger and resignation. "You're firing me." "I am," Keisha confirmed. "Pleasure to meet you. I'm the new owner of this bank. You're fired." The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Keisha gathered all employees in the main lobby to introduce herself as the new owner. Some people looked nervous, others curious, some even relieved. "I know management changes can be worrying," she said, "but I want to assure you my goal is to strengthen this institution, not destroy it. We will work together to make First National a bank that truly serves our community." Maria Santos, an account manager who had worked there for 15 years, raised her hand. "What specific changes can we expect?" "First, we will review all lending policies, especially for small businesses. Second, we will implement financial education programs for the community. Third, we will set clear lending goals for local businesses, especially minority-owned ones." Keisha saw some employees exchange hopeful looks. Clearly, not everyone had been happy with the bank's previous direction. "And what about layoffs?" another employee asked. "We will keep the entire staff for at least 6 months," Keisha replied. "After that, we will evaluate based on performance and alignment with our new vision, not on arbitrary cuts." For the rest of the morning, Keisha met individually with each senior manager. She found many had been frustrated with Patterson's restrictive policies, especially his reluctance to lend to non-traditional businesses, a euphemism she quickly decoded. "Mr. Patterson always said we should be cautious with certain types of clients," explained Robert Kim, commercial loans manager. "But honestly, many of the requests we denied were from solid entrepreneurs who went elsewhere and thrived." At 2 p.m., Patterson finished clearing out his office. Keisha watched from the window as he loaded a cardboard box into his car. For a moment, she felt something that might have been pity. As Patterson walked out the door one last time, Keisha realized the true victory wasn't revenge, but what she would do with that power. 6 months after the acquisition, First National Bank had transformed into something unrecognizable. The lobby, once cold and intimidating, now displayed artwork from local Detroit artists. The main counter had been redesigned to be more welcoming, with comfortable seating and a dedicated area for informal financial consultations. Keisha was in her new office, the former Patterson's office, which she had redecorated with modern furniture and an entire wall dedicated to photos of the local community, when Maria Santos knocked on the door. "We have another candidate for the First Steps program," said Maria, who had become the manager of the bank's new microloan initiative. The First Steps program was Keisha's most ambitious project. Aimed at aspiring entrepreneurs, especially women and minorities, it offered loans up to $50,000 with subsidized interest rates, and more importantly, ongoing business mentorship. "Tell me about it," Keisha said, motioning for Maria to sit. "Carmen Rodriguez, 34 years old, 3 kids. She wants to open a beauty salon specializing in textured hair in Southwest Detroit. She has 10 years of experience as a hairstylist, an established client base, and a solid business plan." Keisha smiled. "What's the problem?" No previous bank wanted to lend to her. Limited credit history, no property to use as collateral, and 2 banks basically said the market for that kind of business was too niche. "That kind of business," Keisha repeated, shaking her head. She knew that code well. "Schedule a meeting with her for tomorrow morning." The next day, Carmen Rodriguez entered the bank visibly nervous. She was a small woman, hair perfectly styled, carrying a worn folder with her documents. Keisha greeted her personally in the lobby. "Miss Rodriguez? I'm Keisha Williams, the owner of the bank. Nice to meet you." Carmen's expression shifted from nervousness to surprise. "You're the owner?" "I am, and I'm very interested in hearing about your business plan." Over the next hour, Carmen presented her vision, a full-service salon focused on natural hair and specialized treatments for Black and Latina women. She had identified a market gap in Southwest Detroit, researched suppliers, and even negotiated a favorable lease for a perfectly located space. "How many banks did you approach before coming here?" Keisha asked. 5, Carmen answered softly. "All said it was too risky." "Risky how?" "One manager told me beauty salons fail too quickly. Another said I should work for someone else first before thinking of owning my own business. And a third," Carmen hesitated. "What did the third say?" "That Latina women with 3 kids aren't good candidates for business loans." Keisha felt that familiar burning in her chest. "Carmen, I'm going to approve your loan. But more than that, I'm going to connect you with our network of mentors. Do you know Sandra Williams?" Carmen shook her head. "Sandra manages one of my restaurants. She's also a single mom who built her career from scratch. She can help you with operational aspects that don't show up in business manuals." 3 weeks later, Carmen signed the loan documents. Keisha made sure to be there. "Thank you," Carmen said, tears in her eyes. "You don't know what this means." "I do," Keisha replied. "I was exactly where you are. The First Steps program had approved 15 loans in its first 6 months. There was a Haitian mechanic wanting to open his own shop, a retiree turning her passion for sewing into an alterations business, and a young Iraq War veteran who developed technology for vertical urban farming. Each approval was a personal victory for Keisha. More importantly, the results were surprisingly positive. The program's default rate was only 3%, far lower than traditional commercial loans. Big banks are missing an opportunity, Keisha explained during an interview with the Detroit Free Press. They focus only on historical numbers and physical collateral. We focus on human potential and commitment to the community. The program's success began attracting national attention. Keisha was invited to speak at financial inclusion conferences. The Wall Street Journal wrote an article about First National's model, and she even received a call from a Treasury Department advisor interested in replicating the program in other cities. But the most meaningful moment came on a Thursday afternoon while Keisha was reviewing monthly reports. Maria Santos entered with a stack of documents. "We have a problem," Maria said, but she was smiling. "What kind of problem?" "A good problem. We've received 127 loan applications in the last 2 weeks. We'll need to expand the team." Keisha looked at the numbers. First National had grown deposits by 340% in 6 months. The commercial loan portfolio had increased 180%, and, most importantly, 73% of new loans were to businesses owned by women, minorities, or immigrants. "Do you know what that means?" Keisha said. "That we're doing something right? That we're proving inclusion isn't charity. It's good business." That night, Keisha went to the original Corktown restaurant. It was her Thursday ritual. After a full day at the bank, she returned to the kitchen where it all began. Tommy was preparing dinner, Maria was supervising a new dessert recipe, and the usual late afternoon rush created a familiar, comforting energy. "How was Banker Day?" Maria asked, using the affectionate nickname she'd coined. "We approved 3 more loans today," Keisha replied, tying her apron. "A taco food truck, a vintage clothing store, and a residential cleaning service." "You're changing the world, one person at a time," Tommy said, smiling. Keisha began preparing the dish she'd learned from her grandmother, okra stew with chicken, seasoned with the secret spice blend Rose Williams had passed down decades ago. It was the same dish she served on Soul Kitchen's first day, the same that had inspired her entrepreneurial journey. But as she stirred the ingredients, Keisha realized something had changed. The seasoning was the same, the technique identical, but the flavor was different. There was something new, deeper satisfaction, clearer purpose. "Grandma," she murmured to herself, "would you say this dish tastes different now?" As if in response, Rose Williams's voice echoed in her mind. "The true seasoning doesn't come from spices, girl. It comes from the love you put into the food." Keisha smiled. Now she understood. The new flavor wasn't revenge against Patterson or satisfaction from accumulated wealth. It was the flavor of justice, the satisfaction of using her power to open doors that had been closed to her, and so many others. 2 hours later, as the restaurant was closing, Keisha received an unexpected call. "Miss Williams? My name is Patricia Chen. I have a small catering business and would like to apply for a loan." "Of course," Keisha replied. "What's your story?" "Well, I worked in tech for 15 years, but I always dreamed of having my own food business. I developed a concept for Asian American fusion catering, but 3 banks have already turned me down." Keisha closed her eyes and smiled. "Patricia, how about we talk tomorrow morning? 9 o'clock at First National Bank. Ask for Maria Santos. She'll take care of everything." After hanging up, Keisha returned to the kitchen. She served herself a small plate of the chicken stew and tasted it slowly. The flavor was perfect, not just because of her grandmother's spices, but because of the invisible seasoning Rose Williams had always known was the most important. The seasoning of opportunity given, the seasoning of dreams realized, the seasoning of justice served, not as a cold dish of revenge, but as a warm meal of hope. Keisha looked around the kitchen where her journey had begun. Soul Kitchen kept growing. First National was changing lives, and she had discovered that the true reward wasn't what she had taken from Patterson, but what she had given to people like Carmen Rodriguez and Patricia Chen. That was what her grandmother meant by the true seasoning. And finally, after all these years, Keisha had learned the full recipe. So, what did you think of Keisha's journey? Leave a comment. Have you ever been underestimated or rejected because of prejudice? How did you handle it? What was the most powerful moment in the story? When she bought the bank, fired Patterson, or started helping other entrepreneurs? If this story inspired you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and entrepreneurship. Want more content like this? Click the playlist that's appearing on your screen right now. Remember, every great empire started with someone who refused to take no as the final answer. What will your story be?